Welcome to the Resilient Addict Podcast. I'm Jody Lewis, and I'm here today with Rodney Wright, the author, How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex. Welcome, Rodney.
Thank you. The book is actually titled How to Talk with Your Kids, not to your kids. So we talk about this ongoing dialogue. So yeah, honored to be with you, Jody. What a treat for me to be here today.
Yeah, so glad you're here, brother. Thank you for taking the time. Now, I'd love it if you could give our viewers just a little background about you, what you're all about, how you came to write this book. And I know you work with Pure Desire as well. So just give us the elevator spiel.
Boy, I'm gonna try to make it quick, which is glad you have editing capability. But long story short, I started my recovery work with my own sexual addiction about 29, almost 30 years ago now, where I was a young man. I didn't have any framework to know how to navigate sexual development, thought all my sexuality was lust and evil. And I thought I was just fighting the demon of lust, not I'm just 12 with normal adolescent sexual development. But I didn't have any framework to know how to get through it. Therefore, porn became the sex educator. And it really got a hold in me. And when I got to counseling, I realized that I had a brain problem, not just a moral problem, and how to retrain the brain and how the scripture speaks to that. And so that became a 3-year process for me of really just transforming and seeing my sexuality in a really healthy way, where it had been given to me in a real shameful way based on my faith, my lack of communication in my family of origin. And so there was a lot of confusion around all of this. And of course, I just felt pretty beat up and pretty defeated. So on my healing journey, years later, I now work for a nonprofit called Pure Desire Ministries, who is a recovery organization bringing hope, healing, and freedom to men and women with sexual addiction or betrayal trauma. And our heart, the vision of PD is to really be a part of a movement that's helping people heal and inviting others into sexual wholeness, where dignity, honor, and safety is restored. And so just so grateful to be a part of that. And part of our work is proactively, let's write a parent book so that porn doesn't have to be the sex educator of our kids. So how do we help this problem? Well, what if we could proactively go to churches, get in front of parents and say, here's a better narrative around communicating healthy sexual development, then your silence isn't helping anybody when it comes to the area of, masturbation or just sexual growth and health. How do you manage it in a way that honors yourself and honors others? So anyway, I can go on forever, but I'm going to land it with that. So we've been with Pure Desire now 8 years as an employee, and I've served on the board at PD, and we're just helping all that we can to move the mission down.
That's beautiful, brother. I love that. I have read most of the book, not all of it, so I'd love to jump in a little bit about it. I'll put a link in the video to where people can buy the book. I'm assuming Amazon, great place to source it.
puredesire.org. You can get it there.
Great.
And it's in our store. It's a resource there. And there's also a digital parent training that you can go through based on the book. So you can actually get 10 sessions of my wife and I and some other experts that are talking about healthy sexual development. And you can just take it as a couple. You can do it in a small group or a workshop in a church. Digital content is very nice because at your own pace, you can go through it. But they're the 10 principles based on our book.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about those. So if we've got parents that are watching, or, dads, moms, even pastoral staff, church staff, talking about sex is for many parents scary, right? I know for me, I've got 9 children. Right. I've had that talk many times.
Right. So son, the penis gets erect and goes into a lubricated vagina. This is best, right? Those are awkward phrases. How do we explain sex? It can be a very daunting experience if you look at it from just that one perspective.
Yeah. And I think as a parent, we talk basic stuff early on, and that kind of progresses. And I think, at least in my experience, I'm seeing a lot of children at a very young age being exposed to content or material that they're not ready for. And that probably can create a lot of questions in their mind, but maybe they don't feel safe, or they don't feel like they can talk about that or ask about that. If you're a parent who doesn't know if your child has been exposed to any type of material, how do you set them up for that exposure? And let's just say, and I'd love to address that question as one piece. And then secondarily, if you discovered you have a child that has been exposed, maybe at a sleepover, at a birthday party, on the bus, even if they don't have their own phone and they've been exposed, how do you have those conversations that don't invoke shame and a place of secrecy and hiding.
Yeah. Well, the essence of our book is about healthy family systems. So just think of it that way, healthy family systems. And also, the book could have been entitled How to Talk to Your Kids About Anything. Sex is just the hardest thing to talk about, right? So part of it, mom and dad, is you being a safe person, you having your kids' best interest, and just realizing that your kids don't have a fully developed adult mind when it comes to sexuality. They're in a learning pattern, and so if you can just focus on growth, not perfection, and focus on training and guiding, not shaming and punishing. So in some ways we would say it's just when they're exposed, not if. So if you have a start age appropriate development about their body is good, there's nothing wrong with their hand or their clitoris inside the vagina or vulva, that nipples and breast aren't evil, but we have public parts and private parts. And some of our private parts we keep covered, but there's appropriate places for nudity and inappropriate places for nudity. The shower is always a wonderful place to take off all your clothes. The driveway is never a wonderful place to take off all your clothes, right? So appropriate, inappropriate, boundaries, healthy, unhealthy, so that they don't have any negativity around their body or their genitalia. A little boy could say, this is my penis, this is my testicles, my scrotum, zero shame. This is how God made me. God knew my parts were to be on the outside of my body. That's where God made me. And for the girls, they're on the inside of their body, the majority. And so just language about normalizing the body. And so that when there's exposure or maybe there is unhealthy touch by tricky people, they can say, hey, this adult asked me to touch their penis, or someone, tried to touch my penis instead of like my stomach or whatever. You just give clarity around that. And then as a parent, because you've done your own work with your history, when you use sexual language, you're not embarrassed or shameful or kind of squeamish of like, my daughter just said her vagina itches. What do I do with that? Right? Like, help me, I could never say that word maybe or whatever. But you just have a context of saying a little bit more clinical and hearing sexual language in a really healthy context. And this is part of my issue. If our silence within our faith-based churches and our homes, we're never just giving good, healthy language and knowing that mom and dad are the safest people to talk about that, it doesn't set our kid up for success. And when they do make a mistake or a learning opportunity, if they're not trained and guided, but they're shamed and punished like I was as a kid, then that just sets the mom and dad aren't safe. Whatever you do, don't talk to them about this subject matter.
Beautiful. I had the same experience. Tell me. I know Pure Desire is really involved with Barna Group doing studies. What is the average age that children right now are being exposed to pornography?
Well, I don't have that stat right in front of me, but I've heard as young, of course, as 6, 7, 8, just because with social media and exposure, there are organizations non-faith based that are really making pornographic exposure a not just a religious issue, but they're making it a public health issue. For instance, we wouldn't let a kid drink alcohol at 7 years old and think nothing of it, right? And so there's organizations that say, hey, we're against that. There's got to be age limits that protect the innocence of our kids. And some of the studies that are being done, this organization is called Culture Refrain. They're really, really understanding that the porn that kids are exposed to today is much more violent and deviant and degrading. So it's actually traumatic itself, just seeing this exposure, not just to nudity, but to the violence that's connected and the degrading that's connected to it. So we're seeing exposure at a younger age, and then we're seeing marriage at a much older age in society. So it's just a long time for a student to know how to manage this part of their sexuality, for a lot of years, married or single. And so, yeah, we just did a Barna study that came out, and the problem's not getting better. It's actually, it's a cultural norm. And there's pros and cons to that, Jody. We can talk a little bit more about that if you want to. The pros is because everyone is exposed, like my kids who are millennials, they're just like, Dad, everybody's exposed to this. That's just the world we grew up in, right? So there's no shame for them to talk about it because everybody's exposed. Where my generation, you were exposed, but you found it through a magazine or through a video store or whatever. There was more shame around it. This generation, at least my kids, as they're raising now my grandkids, they're much more open to talk about it because they were all exposed to it at one point or another. And in some ways, that's healthier, that there's less shame in order to talk about it. Where my generation, there was more shame and we didn't talk about it. And the shame was the big hurdle. So we're advocates for communication about human sexuality at a very young age, but age appropriate. And so that mom and dad are the safest and home is the safest place to have these dialogues. So you can control the narrative about what's healthy and unhealthy.
Yeah, and having those conversations, if you haven't done some of the preliminary work and then you get into a situation where you have exposure, it
You
just
would
becomes
want the
harder.
kid, you would want the kid to come to you with their device and say, "Hey dad, I saw porn on my phone, my friend Jimmy's computer," just like you said I would. So there's a book that we encourage parents to get called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures by Kristen Jensen. She's on our video training, by the way, who the author of this book. And we would want them to know that kids know what porn is, they know how it hurts them, and they know what to do if they see it. Beautiful, right? What do you do if you see it? You go tell mom and dad. Just like if somebody's stealing your car or there's a room on fire in the house, you just know, hey, this is not good. It's destructive. It hurts the brain. And I know what to do if I see it because my mom and dad have told me, right? And they're the safest people. And I think there's just something beauty about safe people in our world growing up. This is where, as a person of faith and a follower of Jesus and his teachings, Jesus was the safest people for people who had a lot of problems. People with a lot of sexual problems were actually drawn to Jesus, not shamed by Jesus with their sexual challenges.
Amen to that. So we've talked a little bit about exposure, how to talk to your kids. Let's shift a little bit to a child, let's say maybe 12, coming up on puberty, 10, 12, in that range. The child has been looking at porn for years, was exposed early, never talked about it. How do you navigate that? Do you see or advocate for getting therapy for the child? Do you try not to make it a huge deal, but put things in place that will help them navigate that? It seems like I've had quite a few clients and men and men's groups that I've worked with where they kind of just tuck it under the rug. It's part of society. They're going to do it. We can't stop them. It's impossible. Any thoughts, advice there?
I got more thoughts than you have time on that, but I'll give you just some of my opinion, and I'll start with a story. I had 11, 12-year-old and his younger brother. We're camping at a park in Idaho in the summer. We got the tent set up. We got a fire. It's evening. I'm cooking chili. I opened a can of chili, put it in a pot, warming up some chili and hot dogs or whatever. And it's just the guys camp out, just me and my two boys. My son says to me this question, which he felt safe to ask. "Hey, Dad, have you ever looked at porn?" What a great question for a son to ask his father, right? And I say to him, "Who wants more chili?" I changed the subject so fast, Jody, because when he asked me that question, even though I had sobriety in my own recovery, I still had a lot of shame around my story. I didn't know how to integrate my story in my life or how to have a cohesive narrative about how to share my story. So when my kids asked me that question, I could feel the temperature rising, right? Of my, oh my God, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? And I hadn't written a book on parenting at that point, but I said, "Who wants more chili?" I changed the subject. My kids don't remember that conversation. My sons don't remember it, but I do. It was so clear in my mind. And I've had to go back to them, of course, later and say, "Hey, you asked me a question. I didn't answer you correctly. And I'm so sorry. But my shame kept me from being a better parent from you. And doggone it, that's what moves me emotionally. If I can have another parent heal their own shame around their story." So you go back to the scenario that you said, a 12-year-old, he's been looking at porn for a while. You're a parent and you find out. Well, the first thing, when we meet people in vulnerability, it always creates safety. Vulnerability, mom and dad, is your superpower. We write about this in our book. If you can say to the 12-year-old, "Son, when I was first exposed to porn,
It's
I didn't
good.
realize the damage it could really cause in my life. Of course, the porn I saw was chiseled on a rock in a cave. I'm an old guy. We didn't have, these devices strapped to your thighs, as we say, in your pockets, that you could look up anything deviant. But starting with your own story, your own vulnerability, whether it was an issue for you or not, just vulnerability about any problem that you've had and that it's okay to go get help. It's one of the first principles in our book. Healthy people seek help, and seeking help's never a sign of our weakness. It's a sign of our wisdom. So if you can help your kid know, hey, here's my story. I didn't realize it was problematic. I just thought, wow, this is great. I'm sexually aroused. This led me to connecting masturbation to pornography, where I'm now bonding to an image on a screen. And sexuality is so much more, it's so better than that. The narrative around why God gave us human sexuality, God actually wants you to bond to a person, not just an image of a breast or a vagina or whatever porn image someone's into. Better sexuality is bonding to a person and heart to heart. This is the best kind of human sexuality. And this is where we feel like words like manage, mismanage, what's healthy and unhealthy are really good frameworks to say to your son, viewing porn is not healthy for your brain because your brain is releasing. And this is where you can talk about the neurons that create synapse and the limbic part of the brain. And then it gets flooded with dopamine. And that's how things become addicted to us, because the high with that, we were meant to have highs. Like when you take a bite of a delicious donut sometimes and you go, oh, that sugar with coffee, oh, that donut's so good. If you have 12 donuts in a row, that's not going to be beneficial for you. So our sexuality is meant to be a wonderful gift, but it can also be mismanaged, like food, like money, like time, like anything in life. So let's talk about what healthy stewardship looks like as a single young man. And let's talk about that your body and that your arousal isn't bad, but just how do you steward that now in healthy ways that are healthy to yourself and healthy and honorable to other people. So if you're a parent, if you could own your story first and lead with vulnerability, then the kid says, oh, my dad's been through things too. I can go to my dad because my dad or my mom is open with their story. And I find within the Christian faith, because that's what I was raised in, that's my faith background, many times there's a lot of shame around any kind of negative sexual history. I was sexually abused. I had an abortion. I paid for sex. I was addicted to porn. I was molested with someone in the same sex. I've had same sex attraction. There's been so much shame just around sexuality, sexual development, and getting sexual health. I think that is what has kept a lot of our parents silent. So they don't want to or don't know how to begin to help and throw a lifeline to their child.
Man, that's a lot. I love it though. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about addiction a little bit. Porn rewires the brain.
Yes.
And I think one of the sayings that's really resonated with me is neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you've got a child that is grown up with porn as part of their life, do you, as a parent, strip them of their computer? Do you strip them of their phone? Do you, again, I keep coming back to therapy. I know when I as a parent have come across this situation, the immediate tendency is to kind of freak out. Like, we've got to get this child lots of help because we're raising a child who's going to get married. We're raising a child who's going to have a family. And is he going to bring this into his future family? So I guess to narrow that down to a question is, if you have a child that you feel is showing addictive behavior, how do you navigate that as a parent? Because there's really not groups for children. It's very hard to find a therapist that will work with a child around this. And so I feel like a lot of parents are in this place of being stuck or in limbo. I mean, we can talk and tell them all day long that we accept them, we love them, this is normal, your brain's been hijacked, here's what true sex looks like. But I've had 9 kids, bro. It goes in one ear out the other a lot of times. And so in those moments where they are finding boredom, stress at school, disconnection because of fractured relationships, whether it's at school or with friends, it seems like it's such a powerful tractor beam to pull them in over and over and over again. How you break that, it feels impossible sometimes. For adults, absolutely. But we're talking innocent children here.
Well, first of all, our culture is so hyper focused on sexuality that our culture says, sex is the answer to all of life's problems. And we're so inundated at a young age with sexual images, whether it's transgender or same sex or pornography or just be more sexually active. Like somehow sex solves all of life's problems. Whatever your problem is, the root must be around sex. And so a couple things that you say that I think are really important. You're going to help your kid retrain his brain, not just refrain from bad behavior. It's one of our mantras in our recovery work It's not just saying no to something enough, but it's like, can you find healthy ways to self-regulate? And in our book, we write a lot about the subject of masturbation because we think that the church doesn't even, this is a very taboo subject that we don't like to talk about, but we really talk about like it can be a self-soothing behavior for younger children. And one of the parts is not shaming them about their body, their hand, their the head of their penis where there's nerve endings or their clitoris, but just say there's when you do that when you're 6 years old is because it's a self-soothing behavior. We're going to help you mature to find other self-soothing behaviors, other things that help you regulate your system when you're dysregulated. They don't know that term, but other things that help you calm yourself, care for yourself well. And so in recovery, we talk about these are commitment to changes. These are things that we do that maybe don't give us that high dopamine, but they give a good sense of, hey, there's a sense of self-worth and dignity when I do these things. Developmentally, it just depends on how old that child is, but whether it's saving money for a car or whether it's cleaning your room or whether it's just taking care of your physical body by exercise. Hey, we're going to go on a walk today or a hike today, or we've accomplished this, or an eating plan, or relationships where you deeply connect. And so just remember that. Let's talk about addiction because you brought up that word. I would propose that every human is addicted to their way of thinking. It's a universal problem called sin in the scriptures, and we're all in need of recovery. It's the universal term called salvation or sozo, to be made whole, holistic. So this whole thought about, is my kid an addict? Yeah, just get over it. Or does your church have groups for addicts? I hope so. It's the whole human race, right? Instead of we think of addicts or those really bad people that are in the basement on Monday nights, right? So there's a whole mindset that needs to switch about, man, we've all been affected by this disease called sin, and it's distorting our ability to see ourself with dignity, honor, and respect. And that's good language, I think, to help our children with is I want you to treat yourself sexually with dignity, honor, and respect. And I want you to treat other people, whether in person or on a screen, with dignity, honor, and respect. In other words, if the face on that image was your mother or your sister, you would not objectify them. You would want to bring dignity, honor, and respect by giving them your coat to wear or taking away their shame by help covering their nudity because they would be exposed to that. And so just understanding that, some of these things create narratives where you help retrain that brain of your kid. And we're always teaching. And what we model as parents is more important than what we say. For instance, if at the family dinner, I'm scrolling on my phone and not present around people around the table, hey, Rod, you're modeling something. If I say, hey, no devices at dinner, or when we go to bed, we keep our devices here and we sit down and we interact with a game, we have conversation. I mean, this happens in every relationship. We're kind of the test market of the digital world we're growing up in now, especially my children's age. And they're realizing sometimes, hey, I don't want to be connected to that device. Actually, boredom is really good because it interacts another part of my brain that can actually help me be more creative instead of just numbing that out. It's principle 4 in our book, foster connection. Our greatest need isn't orgasm, it's human connection, to be seen, known, and loved. And so the more you can foster connection, and I'm saying start that with a kid at a younger age, it's easier then to build on it. If you've been disconnected and the kid's now 12, there's some uphill work to be done, but it doesn't make it impossible. But I would say vulnerability is the way to start. And then helping them take a holistic approach to what it means to be a healthy person instead of maybe a religious answer. This makes God mad, or, God doesn't love you when you do this. That top down kind of heavy answer, I feel like that's not as much framework. And I'm not saying that there aren't consequences and we shouldn't share consequences, but I think motivating kids out of learning to love and care for yourself is really a great way because someday that's the person you want to be in life, that you love and care for other people.
I love that. That's great advice. And you bring up a good point, devices. Any advice for parents on when to introduce devices into a child's life? And in a situation where you have an addicted teenager, are there tools you've seen that can be effective to limit use. Now, with my children, I instituted a program called Weiss Phone. I don't know if you've heard of Weiss Phone, but it's a basically a dumb phone that looks like a smartphone. It basically allows them to make phone calls and texts,
Yeah.
and you can control what apps they install, but there's no way around hijacking the system. And I've tried other apps; they don't work. So, have you seen anything that works? Any tools?
Well, let me just say this. Our organization has a book called Digital Natives, and it talks about technology. There's a lot of organizations out there that are a little bit more on the cutting edge digitally because it changes so quick and so fast. Now, I'm a 58-year-old to our listeners, so I'm just learning how to turn my computer on. So I just want to say I'm not the digital expert, but I just would say this. Mom and dad, you're introducing your kids to technology by how you model your technology, right? So technology isn't evil. Let's just start with that. It has to be managed in healthy ways. I FaceTime my grandson, who's 4 years old now, up in Spokane, Washington, right? Hi, Louie Lee Zabidio, right? And we have a great time. That's using technology in a healthy way, but letting him just scroll on my phone, that's not a part of that relationship. So I do think that like how you manage technology is important, and just setting a culture in your home about connection and deep relationships is really, really healthy. And then seeing where technology can be a blessing and where it can be a challenge is really, really important. And again, Culture Reframe is another organization that I think they do a good job on technology and some of that piece. They're a non-faith-based organization, so their values may not be exactly the same as a faith-based, but they don't want porn to be the sex educator, and they're really want to protect young lives. And so I just think the device you mentioned is really good. But if you have a technology plan, that's really helpful. And again, mom and dad are on that same plan.
It's been a struggle. I mean, raising 9 children in a world, I didn't have to deal with this as a child. I don't think you did either. Finding magazines and the occasional video somewhere was as good as it got. And but now even scrolling on Facebook Marketplace, you'll see inappropriate material. And so it's a massive battle. And I feel like we've got to, I think you mentioned taking the charge at protecting these children at the government level. And there's just so much that I think needs to happen there. I know Texas, I just had a great guest on my show from Texas, and they've instituted some laws that make the barriers a little harder. Age verification.
Right.
Doing that nationwide would be amazing. Tell me a little bit more about Pure Desire. Does Pure Desire have any plans for some type of content for children or adolescents in the future?
This is where in some of our resources, like we recommend books that parents can read with their children, right? So like our book, How to Talk with Your Kids About Sex, isn't a book for kids to read. It's a book that we encourage mom and dad to read and talk about these 10 principles, right? Pursue your own health, number 1. Number 2, practice communication, educate yourself, foster connection, focus on growth, not perfection, welcome questions, be ready anytime, train, not shame and punish, modeling. And then the last one is never turn away from your kid when they struggle. So our book is more about mom and dad. Here's a framework to not have one conversation when your kid's 13 caught with porn or sending nudes or getting nudes on their phone, but it's about how to build a framework for 100 1-minute conversations all through their age and stage of development where you're the safest person. And there's reasons why many of my generation growing up didn't feel safe with our parents because of some of the trauma that happened to us. But we get to set a new framework. And I think of that with my own grandkids now. And my wife and I want to be safe grandparents, that we can let them know what's healthy and unhealthy. And because some of their learning at 2, 3, and 4, they're just kids being curious. They're not evil. They're just asking curious things. And we can just say, oh, no, that's not appropriate or healthy. And here's why. And here's what is healthy. And here's why. They're not bad. They're just curious kids. So having that framework, but there is some Christian-based, faith-based series that we like, where you sit down with your kids and you read age-appropriate books about sexuality, about the body. And they'll explain intercourse. They'll explain age-appropriate things of what the kids need to know. And so there are great tools out there that help aid these conversations. But I would simply say what we model as parents is one of the best gifts we give our kids. Or like we used to say in California, you got to smoke what you're selling. Now that's metaphorically here now. Don't take me literal. But I'm just saying, like, if you're okay with sexual communication If you're okay with your missteps and you're going to share them in age appropriate ways with your kid, because I think that's a little bit of fear too. Well, what do I share with my kid? Do I share some of the dumb things I did at 16 years old? Maybe not. They're only 12, but I would share them with them when they're 22. Hey, you're an adult now and you can know anything about your dad's history that you want to know. I don't have anything to hide from you, but I really struggled in this area of my life. And if I can build a bridge and help you not have these same challenges, well, good on me, you know?
Yeah, that's good advice. Tell me, what is one thing you would, if you could just leave parents with one statement, one sentence, don't do this or do this, what would you say? How would you summarize that?
Well, I'll start with a positive narrative. Our sexuality is good, and we're image bearers of God made in their image, male and female. So I would start with mom and dad, create a positive narrative around their body and around human sexuality. Right? I used to say to high school boys when they were young, hey guys, whenever you have an erection, here's what I want you to do. Now, how many know I had their attention with that line, right? I would say, stop and say, God, thank you for this ability. And they looked at me like I was smoking something, like, Rod, you're crazy. And I would say, then say to God, help me to manage this in a way that honors myself and a way that honors other people. So this is part of my bent and my bias. I think our faith communities haven't started with a positive narrative around human sexuality. And I'm simply saying, oh no, this was designed by God. The ability to bond, the ability to procreate, the strategic nerve endings in the head of the penis and the clitoris, that was all simply for the fact of enjoying pleasure so that we bond to the person. That was all God's idea, right? So a positive narrative around human sexuality would be one. The opposite side of that is don't let porn be the sex educator of our kids. Your silence isn't helping the narrative. And if you can't do it, then partner, find resources. If you're a shy person, find out which spouse isn't shy. Mom can talk to the boys, dad can talk to the girls, but figure out how to create healthier narratives. Or if you're a single parent, just how do we get healthier communication in front of our kids around this? Healthy adults that can really help our kids navigate to something different, you know?
So I think a theme I hear here is, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, is if I'm a ship and I am on a heading, I'm not whipping it around 180 degrees in minutes or seconds. I'm just doing a nice slow turn to a different degree, whatever that looks like, right? So it sounds like slow and steady.
Part of that is 101-minute conversations.
Yes.
Sometimes we just want to say, my brother-in-law tells a funny story. When his kids were like 3 months, he said, I told them everything I knew about sex when they were 3 months old. So I can honestly say, well, we've already had the talk, because they were only 3 months old. But the reality is like what you model and those 100-minute conversations that mom's safe, dad's safe, they can talk about sexuality. Questions are welcomed, you know? And I've got so many stories and feels like I've shared them a lot because I talk a lot about this, but when our kids ask questions, we could answer them in age appropriate and we could repeat and come back to those same kind of things to where mom and dad, they know you're the safest person and that no subject is taboo. You may not have the correct answer or always answer it correctly, but that's okay because you'll be able to come back around and you'll have another opportunity. That's a part of our book. We wrote some of our mistakes in our book so you wouldn't have to make them. You can learn from ours, right? And yet you realize that it's not, you got to do this perfectly. Or if your kids ever struggle, that's part of the lie out there too. If my kids struggle in life, I didn't break the curse of sin or whatever. Well, I say to parents, Adam and Eve had 3 kids. Excuse me. Adam and Eve had 3 parents, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, right? If anybody was going to grow kids God's way, it would have been Adam and Eve. It would have been the Father, Son, and Spirit. So those 2 kids struggled in their journey. So I would simply propose struggle is a part of our learning. And if you could see sin not as a mistake to be punished, but a disease to be healed, it's a better narrative to begin to raise your kids to say, hey, when you struggle, I want to help you fix something when it's a problem before it becomes a pattern in your life. Those are 2 different narratives. And if you can make learning and growing a part of your family system, then it lowers shame. And I find it's a healthier environment for things to grow.
Yeah, that's a great point. Something that's coming to mind for me is if a parent is in shame, I mean, yes, check their behavior. I get that. But if a parent is in shame over allowing their child to be exposed, over feeling like they've ruined their child's future, how would you guide them out of that feeling so they can be more vulnerable?
Well, metaphorically, I would just say put the gun down, or because sometimes we hold ourselves to, I got to be this perfect parent. To my point, there hasn't been a perfect parent. I mean, this is all part of the journey. And we say to our children, they're adults now, two of them are married. We say, take what was healthy in Rodney and Tracy Wright's marriage, family that you grew up in, all that was healthy in us, take it. But our dysfunction, leave it with us. Don't take my dysfunction. Recognize it for what it is. Oh, this was something dad wasn't good at or didn't know how to, process well or do. Leave my dysfunction with me. Find something healthier and move on. So some of that could be from maybe our faith that just says, hey, if we're going to raise kids, we got to raise them to make God honoring decisions. And if our kids don't, it means that we're a bad parent. To my point earlier, God's two kids, Adam and Eve, they struggled. So I just would try to say, think about what's healthy, not about what's perfect. And think about how do you move toward maturing, not perfection.
That's beautiful, brother. Any parting thoughts? Anything that you would add to this beautiful conversation? You have shined light where there is darkness, my
Oh,
friend.
man. Well, I don't care what age you are. I was just talking to a grandparent recently who's 77, fortunately navigating a divorce, in struggle, who has a 12-year-old grandson. And I said to that grandson, I said to the grandfather, Grandpa, don't miss this opportunity to help your grandson. Build a bridge for him. Hey, grandson, when I was your age, I was exposed to porn and it cost me dearly. It cost me 2 marriages. It's not the better way. And I want you to know when you're exposed or now that you are exposed in the world in which you live, I wish I would have had safe adults to talk to. And if your dad and I can be those safe adults, don't believe the lie that culture, your friends are saying, because this can really cause damage. And I'm sitting here today with some of the aftermath of choices that I've made years and it's just now coming to really kind of grow through that. So I guess I would just leave you is shame is our big enemy. Shame is what we're really fighting. And that's where I find that what's a greater power than shame is love. In my opinion, it's the love of God that's the greatest power in the world. The love that lays their life down for us because they know we're worthy of love. And I would just say to the parent who feels shame, you're worthy of love and get around a counselor, a recovery group where you're known, seen, and loved. I tell this story or this little song, Jesus loves me, this I know. And I like to sing it, Jesus knows me, my wife knows me, my kids know me, my recovery group people know me. I'm known and loved. Jesus knows me, this I love. And when you're known and you don't live with those secrets and the healing of love has touched your soul, then you're willing to share your story to help people or you don't live in that shame. And that's really what we're fighting no matter what age. If you're a 5-year-old that feels shame or you're an 85-year-old that feels shame, that's where I found that my faith has really pulled me into the places of love. And unfortunately, sometimes our faith communities haven't always been the safest place to be real because we got shamed or you should have known better or kicked out. There's been, a lot of horror stories I could tell, but find safe people. Ask God to lead you to safe people and safe resources. I highly recommend puredesire.org. We got groups for men and women, whether you've been betrayed or you're an addict. And now we're moving down this education arm, which I'm really thrilled about as another pathway for us, where we're going to be a resource to churches, where we say to churches, hey, let's help educate your parents with our parent course. And I'm excited to see the Western church really be proactive about a different narrative around human sexuality and sexual development.
Beautiful. I love it. I love what you guys are doing. I love what you said here today. Thank you so much for your vulnerability, your time, all that you are giving to this, the energy you put into it. It is such a blessing for so many. And thank you for being here today.
Jody, you're welcome. And whether it's my book or any book, mom and dad, get a resource. You're not alone. And, seek help and get some wisdom moving forward. I think you're already doing that by listening to this podcast. And Jody, 9 kids alone, you get a special reward, just you and your wife for that fact. God bless you. And thanks for trying to be an intentional parent, not a perfect parent, but just trying to grow and be healthy. I'm proud of you for your journey and what you're doing to try to help this problem in the world. I think you're an answer to my prayer that God would raise up thousands of voices in this world to bring hope, healing, and freedom to others. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Very welcome. And thank you again. I appreciate you. Take care.
Okay.